isn't performing other bodily functions. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Monday meeting of Council. I'd call the meeting to order. Our clerk today will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. The first item is a procedural motion to proceed in camera. Moved by Councillor Thorpe, seconded by Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the November 1st regular meeting of Council. I'd first like to recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. Tonight's regular meeting of Council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. As the province is now in Phase 3 of the reopening plan, question period has been reinstated for those in attendance for agenda items only. Question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet, and at the start of question period I will call those up who have signed to the podium to address Council. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, Ms. Gurry. We have none this evening. Motion for adoption of the agenda. Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Brown. Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carries. I just have a couple of items tonight for the Mayor's report. Firstly, to remind everyone that starting today, new provincial health order increases vaccine checking at recreation facilities. So that impacts us. The latest provincial health order released on October 25th requires that increased vaccination checking occurs at City of Nanaimo recreation facilities starting today. Those changes will be as follows. Adults volunteering with children, assisting children, or spectating at a child or youth program must show proof of vaccination regardless of the size of the group. For arena programs with mixed ages and over 50 people, for example, Everyone Welcome Skates, all participants and spectators ages 12 and up must show proof of vaccination. Parks, Recreation and Culture staff reminding participants to bring their proof of vaccination as well as government-issued ID, driver's license, passport, BCID, and be prepared to show it for entry into programs and events. This change is a change rather from what was previously required and is in effect as of today. And the second thing is, and it's obvious, we are approaching Remembrance Day. It is customary that the pinning of the first symbolic poppy of the campaign to launch the fundraising for the Poppy Remembrance Day period is to be pinned on the mayor, which happened last week. They are generally worn during this time, which falls between the last Friday in October to Remembrance Day on November the 11th. The poppy is to honor all veterans and fallen soldiers. On Tuesday, October 26th, I received that poppy from representatives of the Royal Canadian Legion branch here in Nanaimo, along with presidents of both the other local legions. The money raised through donations during the poppy campaign goes into a fund that each branch of the Legion, there are two in Nanaimo, Branch 256 and Branch 10, can use to help veterans with a variety of wellness and support to them and their families. I encourage all of our citizens to wear a poppy in memory and support of our brave men and women veterans who served and defended our country and preserved our right to freedom. And on this day, and as every day, we should thank them for their dedicated service to Canada. Nanaimo's Remembrance Day ceremony will be held at the Dallas Square Cenotaph on November the 11th. And at this time, I'm going to ask all public members to pay attention to whatever restrictions may be announced or appropriate around that day. We are getting used to living in reduced circumstances as British Columbians, notwithstanding the importance of events and the meaningful nature of the ceremony on November the 11th. We have nothing to rise and report on, Ms. Gurry. We have no presentations. Committee minutes are just for receipt. The next item is a motion for adoption of consent items. Councillor Gesselbrock, you want something withdrawn from the consent agenda?
Please, could I get item, I believe,
could you perhaps turn on your, thank you.
I believe it's item 1, or A1, 10A1.
Okay.
Fossil fuel divestment.
Then I would ask for a motion for adoption of the consent items, all the others. Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock, you wanted to speak to this one? And that's 10A1, the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, and it's the fossil fuel divestment and responsible investing.
So question to staff, does the motion need to be put forward to be moved?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Gesselbrock, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can have it moved and seconded because it's currently not on the floor, and you could speak to it and then vote on it, or you could make a formal amendment to it once it's been moved and seconded and is on the floor, and have that seconded and go through that process. And or because it's not currently on the floor, you could move another motion as well. That is available
Okay.
as well.
I may speak a little and then put something forward.
It might be best to move the motion and then see if it's seconded and then speak to it.
Okay. I'll move that 10% of the City of Nanaimo's investment portfolio, excluding high interest savings account, be socially responsible investments.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Brown seconds. Councillor Gesselbrock, you wish to speak to it?
Thank you. Just to start off a discussion on this, I think, given it's COP26 right now, and the nations are discussing, how we're going to accelerate action on climate change, and there's a recent UN report, reported in the BBC in a world round that we're not going to come near to meeting emissions reduction for the 1.5 degree limit to avoid catastrophic climate change. I feel really strongly that this issue is not being taken seriously enough, and one area that is holding things back is the complexity of our financial system. And although it's not an area that municipalities necessarily weigh into, we have about 160 million plus invested of our reserves, and there is little accountability or investigation of where this money does get invested. And I appreciate the work staff did in bringing this forward, and I'm continually learning more and more. And so the GICs that we have a large amount of our money invested in, depending on the type of GIC, there could be anywhere from 1% that's directly invested in fossil fuels, and then some aren't reporting. It's tough to get the information from the banks. But I think the recommendation that was put forward that initially was on from the Finance Committee about us investing, choosing socially responsible investments when it reaches 5% of the yield that a traditional investment is, I think is one of those motions and statements that, when you hear the youth complain that politicians are speaking and saying things but not doing anything, that type of thing reflects that, because that would lead to no change or investigation of where our money is currently and be investigated. And the last month or since that was passed, I've been really struggling with accepting that. And I think that we do have the responsibility to look forward, to look more deeply into this. And another thing I discovered in the conversation with staff is that if we did option 2, which was the motion that I just put forward, 10% of our investments be socially responsible, we actually currently qualify with that, the way that our investments are done right now, if we use these high interest savings accounts, because the high interest savings account that we are invested in, under the definition of fossil fuel free investment, it falls into that. And it's still the status quo. We're not actually actively looking to go through our investments and divest from items that we clearly demonstrated that are affecting us and the planet. And I think that to actually do an investment policy that achieves these ends and actually does a divestment in a way that's, one, mindful that we can't immediately pull all the money out and affect our revenues that quickly, especially at a time when we're under financial pressure, but do it in a way that we meet our objective. A lot more focused attention needs to be put on this particular item. So the motion that's on the floor right now basically says that the instrument that's available right now is the MFA fossil fuel free bond, and with 10% of our portfolio in that, we would face about a $100,000 reduction in our revenue from our current investments, and that's with the price being right now where it's at, where we've saw all our investments drop from like a 3 or 2.5% yield all the way down to 1.5%. And that's not to say that it's going to stay there, but there's a lot of complex things about this, and I don't think that the options that were put forward and the level of discussion that we initially had was able to get into that. And the motion that I have forward right now is the best that we can do without a further deeper discussion onto it, but maybe there might be more options to get into the weeds a bit more when we have a bit more time. But
Thank you. Is there anyone else? My personal view is that we debated this matter at some length at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, and I appreciate Councillor Gesselbrock's passion around this issue, but he's frankly made my argument. We already invest over 25% in what has been described as fossil-free investments. There was no evidence presented we were engaging in investing in the fossil fuel industry. There's no evidence we are engaging in significant or any investing whatsoever in what would be, you could call perhaps socially irresponsible investments. I'm simply not prepared to support a motion which, with the greatest respect, appears to be saying, look at us, we're good. We're already good in this city and have been apparently for some time without any change to the existing investment policy. The motion that Councillor Martman brought forward I thought was the appropriate one, and I'd certainly be prepared to support that again. That is the motion that would have gone by consent tonight if this had not been withdrawn, but I'm not prepared to go further than that. And most particularly, I'm not prepared to consider it because, as I say, there is simply no evidence. We appear to be, in my respectful opinion, a solution in search of a problem that doesn't exist when it comes to the investment policies of this city. Councillor Hemmens and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Briefly, I'll be supporting this motion for the reasons that I argued at our Finance and Audit Committee. I think staff gave us 3 potential options. The middle one provided us with the ability to kind of enter into this and have these conversations as a council, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Happy to support this. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too agree with you. We did discuss this and debate this at the Finance and Audit, and so I'm a little bit torn here, but I'm actually going to, if there's a seconder, I'll speak to this, but I'd like to defer this to a future GPC. And if there's a seconder, I'll unpack that.
Motion to refer to the GPC, seconded by Councillor Bonner. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Brown?
If I may, and definitely apologize because I know we don't want to keep going around in circles, but first of all, I felt I got a little passionate at the Finance and Audit and didn't clearly articulate myself and may have been a little over the top on other things, so I apologize for that. I think this is a very nuanced topic that needs to be unpacked fully. And I have some experience going through my own personal finances and around seeking those type of funds and what they mean and all those sorts of things and projecting yields. And I'm not sure we had that full discussion about what some of those nuances are. And I think there's some lingering questions, at least for me. I went back and watched that discussion and I've reviewed the information, and thank you to staff for presenting that. But I think there's some key questions that need to be grappled with, and that's, what does a phasing implementation truly look like based on projected yields, not past yields? How are our financial projects chosen, especially in light of our social procurement values? That essentially is procuring of a product. how are those principles applied and realized through our investment products? Again, the phasing implementation is a question around, projected yields. So I think this is a conversation that I think it is more than just sending a message, because I do know from my own research around my own personal products that what are financial products, what may seem like on the surface, there is reason why these products are labeled SRI, because there's a lot of detail that goes into their creation, and not all of them are created equally. And so there is a lot of nuance there. It's a growing trend for a reason, because I do think it's a policy mechanism that does work over the long term with enough critical mass. SFU today, the latest and large, announcements of doing so, I think it's 600 million. So I think there's some unpacking there that needs to be done by council. I don't think it's in a rush, personally, especially as we grapple with an already challenging budget. But I do think unpacking sort of where our social procurement policy is at, how those values are being realized, and how they relate to our investment products is probably an important conversation to have, and that makes sense at a GPC, because I think ideally it would be great to get maybe representatives from the MFA and things like that to present on the funds and how those funds are chosen and different from other investment products elsewhere. And there was a reason why a few years ago municipalities applied pressure for the creation of those funds. So, whatever happens, happens. But I do think this conversation is worthy of critical reflection and sober thought, with staff given enough time to provide information and make sure that information is given to council to make educated decisions on this. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you. Excuse me. Through you, Your Worship, I agree with Councillor Brown that the whole topic of socially responsible investing is a complex one and means different things to different people depending on their personal values. But the original motion that sparked this discussion was fossil fuel divestment, and that in particular. And we had a lengthy discussion on this at Finance and Audit Committee. We've had a very informative staff report on this already. There were options presented, which we looked at and debated, and came as a committee with a recommendation to this meeting. So I'm not going to support deferring this or referring this back for further discussion. I'd rather see us make a decision tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I'd support a deferral. I think, the deeper I get into trying to understand, the statement that you made that we're actually not invested in fossil fuels is not correct. Each GIC has a different portfolio, and there's also degrees of directness. So some GICs, we didn't get a report back. Thank you, staff, for looking into it initially, but there is one GIC from the Bank of Montreal that said that they don't know, that they can't ascertain what's in the portfolio as of yet, or it's not feasible to let us know. That's not the type of accountability that the public are asking for where our investments are going. There's others that may have exposure, 1% of their portfolio is directly invested in fossil fuels, where the rest of it isn't, but there's indirect. They might be, backed by government loans. Our government could be directly, the federal government could be directly invested. And I think it does take some unpacking, and I think that it's good to educate ourselves on it, because we're all complicit, and the municipalities as a whole have a lot of money that is invested into the financial market, and can, have some influence on the direction of things going. And so as much as not typically looking into this is the type of leadership and I think accountability that we're now being asked for if we're seriously going to take serious trying to do everything possible within our powers to reduce our emissions and our impact on climate. Thank you.
All those in favor of the motion to refer? Councillors Gesselbrock, Brown, Bonner. And those opposed? Councillors Armstrong, Martman, Hemmens, Krog, Thorpe, and Turley. We are now back to the main motion. All those in favor of the main motion? Councillors Gesselbrock, Hemmens, Brown, and Bonner. And those opposed? Councillors Armstrong, Martman, Krog, and Thorpe, and Turley. Motion is defeated. Councillor Martman.
I'd like to move the motion as recommended on the page that I moved previously. Thank you.
Seconded Councillor Armstrong. Unless someone feels a compelling need to speak to this one more time. Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you. Just encourage everybody to look into it a little more, because this stuff does have massive implications, and the suggestion about moving patiently, I think, is a real false one. You got to live your values. Thanks.
Those in favor of the motion, Councillors Armstrong, Martman, Krog, Thorpe, and Turley, and those opposed, Councillors Gesselbrock, Hemmens, Brown, and Bonner. The motion carries. Thank you very much. We are now on to delegations unrelated to agenda items. Mr. Snyder, you're going to speak on manufactured home parks. I believe you've had a chance to discuss this with staff, so if you could introduce yourself, give us your address, and you'll have 5 minutes, and I'll try and wave my hand or indicate when you have a minute left. Welcome, and please take your mask off so we can hear you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and councillors and guests of the city. My name is Brian Snyder. I live in Manufactured Home Park, Charmin Home Park, 6325 Metro Drive in the city. I'm here today to request your support for, which one changes these things? Thank you. 2,934 Nanaimo residents living in 1,630 homes in 21 manufactured home parks, 89% of which are seniors 55 plus, and whose collective home assessment value is over $325 million. So let's review a bit of the history of manufactured home parks in the city. The first one was built in 1950. In 1984, there's 3 critical dates in this timeline. 1984, a city bylaw 2704 regulated the development and standards of manufactured home park communities in the city. In 2007, a provincial study of manufactured home parks, whose key findings and recommendations were parks were threatened with redevelopment due to rising land values, and residents' home equity was not protected. Local governments have an important role to play in the protection of manufactured home parks with community plans and bylaws. The average value per acre of a manufactured home park community in Nanaimo would increase by 235% if rezoned. It was the highest in the province. Nanaimo has the most number of manufactured home parks in all of the province, and the province of BC has almost 1/3 of all manufactured home parks in Canada. It is an important affordable housing sector. In 2007 and 2008, this city had a review done of this report, and it was comprehensive and clear on the issues and solutions available, prompting the city in January of 2008 to write a letter to the then housing minister, Mr. R. Coleman, asking the province to take action. In the letter from the city and the response from Mr. Coleman is in your archives. In 2019, Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act was revised. Compensation was changed from $20,000 when a park closed for a homeowner to the home assessed value. It took 11 years for the provincial government to act on the 2007 report, and it only happened when a new party came to power. Do not wait another 11 years for the province to act. Now is the time for the city to support our manufactured home park residents, which brings us to today and my request for council to update bylaw 2704 and add a compensation and relocation plan to protect homeowners. Apply the bylaw to all 21 parks. Currently, only 7 are covered by your bylaw. The city's 2007-2009 Planning and Development Report is an ideal starting point to update this bylaw and implement a compensation and relocation assistance plan for Nanaimo residents in manufactured home parks. Why? What was the result of the 11-year wait? From 2006 to 2019, In BC, 150 parks were closed, 6,357 homes lost, 11,442 park residents lost some home equity and had to move. There was no redevelopment of Nanaimo's manufactured home parks during that time. But can this happen in Nanaimo? Yes, the average age of our parks is over 42 years, 8 or 50 plus. They have aging infrastructures that require upgrades. They're low-density housing, only 10 to 12 people per acre, and they're all situated on valuable land. When first built, most of these parks were on the outskirts of the city. Now they occupy valuable land in residential neighborhoods and commercial businesses and are ideal for higher density housing. The current Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act does not protect the full equity value of residents' homes
1 minute.
or provide relocation assistance for those who are forced to move. Gray areas in the legislation enable landowners to avoid or reduce homeowner compensation. Ask me how. So what happens when a redevelopment announcement is made? The market value of your home drops to zero. Homeowners must go to RTB arbitration at their own cost and present clear facts why their home cannot be moved. Typically, homes in parks are assessed considerably lower than current market value. Ask me for an example. While the developer waits for plans and permits, which can take several years, homeowners can take no action to find homes. When development is ready to start, homeowners receive a 12-month notice of eviction and may only receive compensation on the day before they must leave their home. If hundreds of residents are displaced from a park at the same time, where will they find their accommodations? Therefore, I repeat my request. In 1984, Nanaimo Council passed Bylaw 2704 to govern the development and standards in manufactured home park communities. 37 years later, this requires renewal and updating to meet today's affordable housing requirements. This will provide protection, security, and safety for 2,948 residents now living in manufactured home park communities. And I leave you with this comment.
Mr. Snyder, if you could wrap up.
Published in a BC newspaper, and I apologize in advance for its harshness. Thank you for the privilege to speak to you. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown, I think I've got you left over from the previous debate. Councillor Armstrong.
I just wanted to thank you very much. I think this is a serious problem we've seen, and I think probably Surrey was where it was mostly impacted. So I think it's something that we can, I have some questions for staff after, Your Worship, if that's okay. Thank you. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, through you. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Very interesting information and very concerning. I'm just curious, you alluded to the province early in your presentation. Has the province been silent on this issue, or has there been any indication from them of any type of support or course of action?
There is a movement to make changes to the Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act. I am a director of the British Columbia Manufactured Homeowners Association. We have had a meeting with the Honourable Eby earlier this year, and a second meeting with the Deputy Minister. They're very interested, but things are slow and they have other priorities such as COVID and so on. But as affordable housing, this has great opportunities. It's the only way you get affordable housing is shared land and ownership costs.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Snyder. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'd also like to provide you with a little bit of information that when you said most of them are residents 55 plus, well, when my wife and my newborn son first moved back to Nanaimo, we could only afford a mobile home. So it does cover all age ranges.
It should, and in fact that they're 55 plus is a matter of the landowners stating that that's who they would like to deal with, the less trouble than others. But this is an excellent first-time home buyers affordability. You can get a manufactured home for $150,000 to $300,000, 800 to 1,500 square feet, built in 2 months, and in another 3 to 4 months, driven to the site, assembled, and ready to live in. If you think about Green Thumb Nursery, 40 acres, $25 million, of which you're now not getting any tax dollars from, it would be an ideal place for a manufactured home park.
I didn't lead him to that.
Mr. Snyder, thank you very much. I don't see other questioners, and I want to thank you also for thoughtfully sending material ahead of time. That is always helpful to council, because one thing I can say with confidence about this council, we may not always agree on everything, but everybody reads their material. Thank you.
I would like to just compliment your staff and for their great help and efficiency in getting me here today. Thank you.
Thank you. The next is reports. And the first is development permit application number DP 1206-1534 Extension Road. Mr. Lindsay. Or are we going to toss it to Mr. Holm?
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship Council. Yes, I'm going to turn over the next 3 items to Mr. Holm to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Holm.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Council, and appreciate the opportunity to present the following items. This is a development permit for property in the Cinnabar Valley, 1534 Extension Road, and if it's possible to bring up attachment A to the report on the overhead, that would be very helpful. Thank you. That's the context map to show you where the property is. This property will be familiar to council as it was rezoned in April 2020. So you can see it outlined there on the overhead. This property, again, it's in the Cinnabar Valley. It's located adjacent to the ENN Railway, and it's south of Chase River Elementary School. The rezoning was to support a low-density multifamily form of housing, which is being brought forward tonight in a development permit application form. If you could bring up, please, attachment F to the report, that would be helpful, just to give you an idea of what the proposed development looks like. There's some building renderings that you'll see here overhead. The property is proposed to support 11 units and multifamily form in a 2-story, sort of a townhome style. It's 2 stories on one side. To accommodate the grade, it has 3 stories on the other. The site is slightly graded towards the railway and down Extension Road. The design is contemporary, and it actually addresses the Finnish agrarian design criteria that are identified in the Chase River neighborhood plan. And if you could bring up attachment G, please, it'll show the landscape plan for the, thank you, for the development. The developers provided a robust landscape plan, which also addresses the design criteria for landscaping in the Chase River neighborhood plan, as well as the other applicable general design guidelines the city has for such a development. The design advisory panel considered the application in November of 2020, provided some recommendations which the applicant has addressed through revisions to the project. The proposal includes a request for a minor setback, an increase to allowable fence height within a permitted front yard setback from 1.2 to 2.8 meters to provide for a proposed decorative arbor feature along Extension Road. The proposal also includes a variance to the maximum percentage of small car parking spaces permitted. The bylaw permits 20%, the parking bylaw. The request is to allow 77% of small car parking spaces. So just to put that in round numbers for comparisons, 22 parking spaces are required for the project. The bylaw would allow 9 of those, 40%, to be small car. The request is to allow 17 of those, or 77%, to be small car. I'm happy to take any questions, but that's all I have to add on this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holman. We do have a delegation as well. Councillor Armstrong, you'll wait until the delegation is spoken. Councillor Turley?
Yes, I have a question of staff. Can I ask it now? Thank you. Through you to Mr. Holm. What is the definition of a small car?
That's a good question. It's so in the parking bylaw, through your worship to Councillor Turley's question, it depends on the parking stall arrangement, but depending whether they're parallel or are they perpendicular aisles, etc. But in this case, relatively speaking, a small car is 2.5 meters in width by 4.6 meters in depth, where a large car is 2.75 meters in width by 5.8 meters in depth.
Thank you.
Those dimensions, yeah, you're welcome. Those dimensions do vary depending on the nature of the parking, whether it's parallel again or angled, but in this case, those are the dimensions that would apply.
So we'll all be out tonight, Councillor Turley, measuring our vehicles to see if we're virtuous or not.
Precisely.
Mr. Cathers, and it occurred to me all these years, is it Cathers or Cathers? Cathers, thank you. Welcome.
I'd like to recognize the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations and Mid-Island Métis Nation who have decided to live in this beautiful land. My name is Chris Cathers. I would say most of you know who I am from volunteering in Councillor Thorpe's grade 3 classroom at Chase River to going to school with Councillor Martman's children at Barsby to being involved in various community and business groups. And I just first of all also want to say thank you for your service as council people. I know that you guys get a lot of criticism, and I do appreciate all your hard work that you're doing and spending countless hours. I know it's thankless work. So the last time I was here, I was, so first of all, I'll introduce, so Kulu Walton is also Halkominum for the word Chase River, for those of you who didn't know that. So I've decided to name the project Kulu Walton. It's an 11-unit multifamily development across 4 buildings, which are 2 are duplexes, 1 triplex, 1 quadplex. Each unit is roughly 1,600 square feet with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a single car garage for a total of 2 to 3 stories. The property is already zoned R6 as I rezoned it in 2019. So I've been working on this project for the last 3 years. And so, yeah, we would like to build 11-unit residential townhouses. My last development permit application was for 558 Albert Street, which is apparently still to this day used as an example of an ideal infill project in Nanaimo. Gary Noble at the time was the staff person who recommended people go look at this project. And I know another one of your planners, Caleb Horn, also refers to this. And again, I know that you've all recognized me from different involvement in the community as my involvement with young professionals raising the money to restore the train station. So yeah, the design is an urban farmhouse. It's inspired from kind of a contemporary design intended to complement the rural aesthetics of the Chase River Community Plan. A modern design reflecting the history of the local Scandinavian settlers of Chase River. The buildings are designed with materials meant to kind of balance affordability for families, foster local heritage, and create a design both in building and landscaping. So here's a quick floor plan right here. This is the neighboring adjacent property. So you have the E&N Railway, some houses across the street, and just up and down from the property. And here's a Google Earth shot. So yeah, again, here's another shot of the project. Some of the building materials used for the project, again, it's designed to provide low maintenance and affordability for families. Then the landscape design, really proud about the landscape design. It has community gardens, fruit trees, food producing plants, a lot of them that are native species with playful elements on the site. Again, lots of indigenous species that form a shady coastal forest, open meadow environment, vegetated swale for rainwater, a lot of drought tolerant plants. And there's the pergola entrance that we're seeking a variance for. So again, there's pedestrian walkways from the street to provide and make the property seem open and pedestrian friendly. So the project is on a transportation corridor, including a bus route. There's opportunity for future rail corridor transportation. It's minutes away from Chase River. It's a 15-minute walk to shopping centers. There's a total of 24 parking spots, including 12 electric vehicle charging stations, electric bicycle charging stations. There's an emphasis on food-producing landscape. The larger sandstone project in the area also supports, with infrastructure upgrades, supports this project and the potential for Chase River. Here you can see the parking. And I should also just note that the garages in the units will fit a full-size pickup truck. So I don't know what constitutes like a small parking spot, but I do know there's different, rules. So there is a full, there's enough room in the garages to park a full-size vehicle, but the full-size vehicle in a garage doesn't actually count as a full-size parking spot. Again, there's significant roadway dedication.
Wrap up, Mr.
Okay. And there's going to be improved sidewalks, bicycle laneways, improved walkability, traffic calming measures, increased tax base from one single family to 11 families, $11,000 commitment to the City of Nanaimo Housing Legacy. And it provides, most importantly, is affordable housing options in an area lacking these missing middle alternatives. And this development permit doesn't just benefit some large out-of-town corporation. It supports multi-generations of local Indigenous families that live and work and support our beautiful City of Nanaimo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Turley again? No? Councillor Armstrong?
No, you can remove me because my question was, would a big car fit in the garage? Thank you.
It's all about the cars. Go ahead.
Charge stations, are they going to be inside the garages or outside?
Inside.
Okay, and thank you for doing that beforehand. I think it's an important thing for developers to start doing that. Thanks.
Any other questions for the delegation? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to delegation. Could you pronounce the name again for me?
Kulu Walton.
Okay, I thought you said, because U is always pronounced and in Hulkamania.
Kulu Walton.
Walton, yeah. So just before you get yourself in too much trouble. Okay, thanks.
Very good. Someone care to move the recommended motion? Move Councillor Brown.
Your Worship, we could just ask the delegation to maybe sit down in case there's discussion amongst.
Sorry, yes. You can relax now. Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is general amendments to City of Nanaimo zoning and parking bylaws. Mr. Lindsay, or are we deferring to Mr. Holmes? We're passing the buck and the bus.
Thank you again, Your Worship. This item introduces a number of general amendments to the zoning bylaw and a few to the parking bylaw as well. In fact, the zoning bylaw amendments propose 39 text amendments, 19 mapping amendments, and then the parking bylaw proposing 5 text amendments. The last round of general amendments to the zoning bylaw text-wise was December 2019, and mapping-wise was July 2020. We periodically, staff bring forward usually annually, general amendments to the zoning bylaw, and these are the first round of general amendments to the parking bylaw, which was adopted in 2018. But we generally bring forward amendments to update the content, to address errors that have been identified, to improve clarity in the bylaws, to maintain the relevancy of some of the regulations, and to align the regulations with current best practices, which are evolving in some areas, and we bring forward amendments to address. For instance, in the zoning bylaw, as an example, in this proposed round of amendments, you'll see amendments to gross floor area of buildings that are intended to better address and accommodate thicker exterior walls that are required to address building energy efficiency requirements through step code and the like. So improvements to not hamper building energy efficiency through penalizing people for adding thicker wall assemblies is one of the amendments. Just as an example, another amendment in the package would actually address the variance that the previous application was seeking in relation to the fence height variance for the arbor detail. It's one that council's probably recognized. I mean, it seems like a small item, but we've seen them from time to time. The bylaw currently does not allow additional fence height for these decorative arbor type details, which the last application on the agenda here required a variance to address. The amendments are outlined in detail. I'm happy to take any questions on any of them, but they're outlined in detail on the table of amendments, which is attachment A to the report. And again, proposed are 39 text amendments and 19 mapping amendments to the zoning bylaw, as well as 5 text amendments to the parking bylaw. If these are passed tonight, there would be a public hearing required in relation to the zoning bylaw amendments. So happy to take any questions again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. In order, Councillors Brown and Turley.
I was just getting ready.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Holm. I actually have 2 questions. First one is with regard to 4.6, Part 5 definition, where it refers to recessed decks. I'm assuming that those are decks that are surrounded by 3 exterior walls. And if that's the case, is the thickness of those exterior walls included?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to Councillor Turley's question. Yeah, so the idea there is to actually allow to not penalize people for introducing. We're seeing a shift to multifamily buildings, and we're seeing different requirements and design approaches to address those. And one of the approaches that we're seeing, obviously, is to enhance and to include outdoor amenity space in the form of decks and that for residents, which is great. But currently, the bylaw does penalize some of those situations by counting those areas towards the gross floor area of the building. In this case, I'm just trying to find the reference that...
It's on page 74.
74, thank you very much.
It's for 4.6, Part 5 definitions.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there we are. Thanks. Yeah, so no longer including covered decks within gross floor area. So the wall thickness in that case would not matter. The decks would be excluded from a gross floor area requirement. You would take the gross floor area measurement to the exterior wall, which would be the walls surrounding the deck, and you would not include the deck in the calculation. Does that answer the question?
Sure, thank you. And my second question is on page 77, number 20.22, where it refers to setbacks for fences. And my question is, where an easement is being granted the city for whatever purpose, does the actual setback for the fence refer to the property line, including the assessment easement, or does it start where the easement ends and the actual usable property for the owner starts?
Through Your Worship, I can try and answer Councillor Turley's question there. So that it would be from property line, not from the edge of the easement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Oh.
There we go. I would move that zoning amendment bylaw 2021, number 4500.182, to make general text and mapping amendments to City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 2011, number 4500, pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Councillor Brown.
I would move that zoning amendment bylaw 2021, number 4500.182, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries.
And I would move that off-street parking regulations amendment bylaw 2021, number 7266.02, to make general text amendments to off-street parking regulation bylaw 2018, number 7266, pass first reading.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
And I would move that off-street parking regulations amendment bylaw 2021, number 7266.02, pass second reading.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is official community plan amendment application number OCP 100 and rezoning application number RA 472-456 Milton Street. Mr. Holm, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This proposed amendment to the official community plan and rezoning of the same property for the same purpose, I'll explain in a minute, will be familiar to council. It was brought forward as sort of a late addition to this round of official community plan amendments and is now progressing to a bylaw consideration ahead of consideration of Reimagine Nanaimo at some point in the future. Staff have prepared OCP amendment bylaw and a rezoning bylaw for council's consideration here. I'll talk about that in just a second. If you could bring up attachment A for the context, that would be helpful. So currently the official community plan, thank you. You can see the property highlighted overhead on Milton Street, 456 Milton Street. Currently the official community plan designation for the area is neighborhood, and within that, within the Old City Neighborhood Concept Plan, the property is identified in sub-area 3, multi-family, low density, which supports up to 4 units on the subject property. The proposal for council's consideration tonight is for up to 7 units on the property in a form similar to, and I guess a scale, a density similar to what somebody could achieve under a 4-unit proposal. The applicant has developed quite a refined concept for a 7-unit development on the property. The proposed official community plan amendment would be to redesignate the OCP designation under the Old City Neighborhood Plan to allow up to 7 units. The companion rezoning application would rezone the property from R14, which allows up to 4 units, to R15 with a site-specific amendment to limit development on the site to 7 units. The developer has undertaken consultation on the proposal ahead of council's consideration. The Nanaimo Old City Association had provided correspondence supporting the application. The developer had consulted with the Nanaimo Old City Association on that. The developer has also held a public information meeting on September 30th, and the application, if approved tonight, would proceed to a public hearing following formal referrals to a number of stakeholders, given that it's an official community plan amendment application as well as rezoning. So there would be a formal referral to a number of important stakeholders. If council were to endorse first and second reading of these bylaws tonight, followed by public hearing in the new year. The proposal includes road dedication and from the lane, and as well a community amenity contribution. And that would be under the current policy regarding community amenity contributions. The developer is proposing $1,000 per unit, and that's recommended to be directed 40% to the Housing Legacy Fund and 60% to parks improvements in the Old City area. I'm happy to take any questions, and other than that, I don't have anything further to add on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. I see no questions. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that official community plan amendment bylaw 2021, number 6500.046, to allow 7 residential units at 456 Milton Street pass first reading.
Second to Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Councillor Brown?
Your Worship, I would move that Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 6500.046, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
And I would move that Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 4500.193, to rezone 456 Milton Street from R14 Old City Low Density Fourplex Residential to R15 Old City Medium Density Residential pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries.
And Your Worship, I would move that Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 4500.193, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
And I would move that Council direct staff to secure a community amenity contribution and road dedication prior to adoption of the Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 4500.193, should Council support the Zoning Amendment Bylaw at third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is Council Seating Arrangements Policy. Sounds very important, Ms. Curry.
Very, very much.
Politicians love their seats.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I'm going to turn the next two items over to Ms. Robertson, and she will generally describe the purpose of these items and the bylaws that are associated with the second item. And either one of us are happy to answer any questions you may have. So I'll just turn it over to her.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. Ms. Robertson, good evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. The seating arrangement policy before council is one of the policies that was identified as needing to be amended. And in this case, the seating protocol, it's actually been treated as a policy for a number of years, but it never really was formalized. So it's really just being brought forward to council for formal consideration. The historical practice is such that the councillor with the longest continuing seniority sits in the first seat immediately to the right of the mayor, with the next senior councillor positioned to the left, and from there it just alternates. One addition was made to the policy, though, which was a council member may have a reason to want to exchange seats with another council member, and in those cases, the request would go to the mayor for consideration. And so should council support the proposed policy attached, it would formalize the seating protocol that's been historically followed for a number of years.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown, the appropriate motion. Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Ms. Robertson, thank you. And over to you on political signage regulation bylaw as well.
Okay. At the September 27th GPC, staff provided an overview of how the political signage is currently regulated and how it might be streamlined going forward. And this included a number of options for limiting political signs or locations, and council ultimately chose to stick with the status quo, but did authorize staff to proceed with fixing the conflicts that were in the traffic and highways bylaw and the sign amendment bylaw, and agreed to have staff move forward with one comprehensive political signage bylaw. So the bylaw is now before council this evening, which is a compilation of the regulations found in the traffic and highways bylaw, the sign bylaw, and the Parks and Regulation bylaw. And for ease, it was divided into three uses. So section 3 highlights the use for signs placed on public property. Section 4 relates to private property, and section 5 is the placement of signs within provincial rights-of-way, which is really more of a convenience provision that points to the ministry policy. Staff also added a map that assists with identifying the difference between the provincial highway rights-of-way and the City of Nanaimo roads. And then section 6 sort of outlines the regulations that are for all uses, and includes the provision that council had passed as well, that signs can't be placed before 30 days of the general election or at the assent voting opportunity, and needs to be removed by the next business day. So should council support giving the political sign regulation its first 3 readings, the next step would then be for the amendments to the traffic and highways bylaw and the sign amendment bylaw. And if those receive first 3 readings, then the final step would be to the housekeeping amendment that relates to the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw to remove the fines that point to those previous bylaws and forward them to the new political sign regulation bylaw. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Robertson. On page 129, there's reference at the end of the first top paragraph, political billboard signs are also prohibited. Now, I'm just trying to figure out, that must be because of their size, because from what I can think of, the majority, all of them, if not the majority, are on private property.
I might ask that question over to Mr. Lindsay. That discussion was had previously when we brought forward the policies there. Oh.
Thank you, Worship. Just one other note too, the billboards, it might be because of, but Mr. Lindsay hopefully is here to confirm that they are on the highway, the Ministry of Highway. That might have something to do with it as well.
And I also believe that the billboard signs are already prohibited through the signage bylaw. So we were just basically transferring those provisions over.
They're prohibited within the city of Nanaimo, or prohibited how? Because there's at least two in the city that I'm aware of.
Councillor Turley, perhaps you could ask your question again.
Sure.
Mr. Lindsay? Thank you, Mr. Lindsay.
My question, Mr. Lindsay, was the paragraph at the top of page 129, the last sentence refers to political billboard signs are also prohibited. And my question is why? Because they are on private property, and I didn't know if maybe it was because of the size of the sign. And I do know in past elections they have been used, so.
Sorry, I might be missing the context that it's being used in the report, but you're right. There are absolutely private billboard signs, rooftop signs. Many of them are legal, non-conforming under our sign bylaw that I understand would be outside of this regulation, but they have been used in the past for third-party advertisements, including election purposes, yes.
So I'm still confused.
If there's any, this provision was discussed prior to the GPC meeting that it came forward. And so basically the provisions related to political signage have just been transferred over. I do know that a number of other local government bylaws do prohibit political signage that are billboards. But if council wants to make any changes tonight to that bylaw, we're happy to go back and then come back again with revised provisions.
I'm okay with it because they're pretty expensive to use, and the likelihood of them being used is probably not great because it's only for a short period of time, and most companies want it for a longer time. But I just thought it was unusual that.
Yeah. So, Your Worship, if I may, so this sounds like if it's an existing legal non-conforming billboard sign on private property, there's no restrictions that we place on the use of that for any purposes then so it could be, you could find a billboard sign used for a political signage, and that would be legal. We're not regulating that type of thing at an existing billboard on private property. That would be my take on that. I don't know how we would do that.
Something for future thought, I guess.
That's a good point, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Turley, just quickly, any amendments can be made in the future. This is basically consolidating all of the political signage into one bylaw to make it more consistent and easy to understand come the future elections. So there's always room for amendments should they be necessary.
Councillor Bonner, then Councillor Martman.
Thank you, Worship. I wonder if Councillor Martman knew that when she put her notice of motion out, we'd be upgrading 4 bylaws and having a whole GPC on this thing. My question is regarding political signs 100 meters from a polling station. Will we know, will politicians know running for a candidacy 30 days prior to the election where the polling stations are?
Absolutely.
And the next question, which I know has come up before, is Is it 100 meters from the front door or 100 meters from the building envelope? Property line.
I think it's the center of the building, like the inside of the voting station. So from the center in, we get GIS, and it's from the building.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. And I dug way too far into this one. But on page 151 was removal of temporary signs from the Ministry of Transportation, which states that signs will be stored with reasonable care for a period of 30 days if we as a city remove them. But on page 134 of our own bylaw, we say political signs will be stored for a period of 4 days. And I'm wondering if that's a conflict or...
The difference is that there's ministry rules and then there's the City of Nanaimo rules. So we have to follow the provincial guidelines for signs that are found on their property, but for ones that are found on the City of Nanaimo property, it would be the 4-day rule.
So that would be
There's still a little bit of difference between the two jurisdictions.
Okay. And I just have to state, I'm sure it'll be fine, but I am a little concerned about removal of signs by the next working day. At one time, we had 7 days, and I will support the motion, but it means we all have to get to work the day after an election. Thank you.
If you're happy, you'll be happy to do it, and if you've lost, you'll want to bury the past. So I'm sure we'll all move vigorously. Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Worship. I would move that political signage regulation bylaw 2021 number 7335 to govern the use of political signs within the City of Nanaimo pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor?
Just quickly speak. That's okay.
Sorry?
If I could quickly speak to it.
Yeah. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Okay. I would like to speak to the motion.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
My goodness.
It can be at any reading. There's no limitation.
Your worship, if second reading is on the floor.
I was going to say.
And then Councillor Brown could speak to it then, yeah.
Okay, sure.
Last first reading, second reading. If you can read the motion for second reading.
Yep. Okay, so did we vote on the first?
We voted number one.
Okay. I voted in opposition.
In opposition. Yes. Thank you. Councillor Brown's in opposition.
I would move that
still carries.
I would move the political signage regulation bylaw 2021 number 7335 pass second reading.
We have a seconder, Councillor Thorpe. And Councillor Brown, you wish to speak to it?
I do, and I think any councillor can speak to any motion at any time. I think that should be a clear rule. I just want to say I won't be voting in favor of any of these. I'm just going to speak now. I'm not going to speak to all of them. I was hoping there would be more limitations out of the GPC, but I wasn't there, but this is where we landed, so I'm only going to vote in opposition to the first three, and then I'll just vote in favor. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Everyone?
I'm sorry, oppose.
And Councillor Brown. Well, he's starting a trend here. So everyone's in favor except Councillors Gesselbrock and Brown, right? Thank you. The motion carries.
And I would move that political signage regulation bylaw 2021 number 7335 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillors Gesselbrock and Brown, thank you. The next is Traffic and Highways Amendment Bylaw. Councillor Brown.
I would move that Traffic and Highways Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2021 number 5000.047 to remove references to election signage pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Gesselbrock and Councillor Brown, you were in favor?
I'm in favor, yeah.
He's in favor. So Councillor Gesselbrock's opposed. Thank you. That's very clear.
And I would move that Traffic and Highways Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2021 number 5000.047 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? And any opposed? Councillor Gesselbrock, thank you. Motion carries.
And I would move the Traffic and Highways Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 5000.4047, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Gesselbrock, motion carries. The next is the sign amendment bylaw. Councillor Brown, please.
And I would move that sign amendment bylaw 2021, number 2850.23, to move references to political or campaign signs past first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? Any contrary, Councillor Gesselbrock? Or are you? Well, then it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
And I would move that sign amendment bylaw 2021, number 2850.23, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries.
And I would move that sign amendment bylaw 2021, number 2850.23, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And finally, bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw. Councillor Brown.
I'd move that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2021, number 7159.14, to assign fines associated with political sign violations pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries.
I would move the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw 2021, number 7159.14, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries.
And I would move the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw 2021, number 7159.14, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. The next item is the 2022 Vancouver Island Regional Library Board appointments. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So each year at their first meeting in November, Council is required by Section 17, subsection 2 of the Library Act to appoint one trustee and one alternate to the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board of Trustees, VIRL, otherwise known as VIRL. Councillor Hemmons is the current trustee, serving since her initial appointment in 2018, and Councillor Martman is the current alternate. So this report is before you to seek another appointment for trustee to the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board and an alternate as well. It's required on an annual basis, and they do encourage reappointment to maintain continuity and up to 8 years of service. So they are basically requesting that we keep it the same if Councillor Hemmons is willing to serve again.
Councillor Armstrong.
I wanted to move the motion that Councillor Hemmons serve and Councillor Martin stay as the secondary or alternate.
And we have a seconder with Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Don't we wish election to this council were that simple? Item 13, bylaws. Business license bylaw 2021, number 7318. Is anyone here who wishes to speak with respect to business license bylaw 2021, number 7318? Seeing no one but staff here tonight, who I assume are going to be supportive of this.
I would move that fees and charges amendment bylaw 2021, number 7041.03, to add business license fees be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. The next is fees and charges amendment bylaw 2021, number 7041.03.
I would move that fees and charges amendment bylaw 2021, number 7041.03, to add business license fees be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. And finally, bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2021, number 7159.13.
I would move that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2021, number 7159.13, to replace the fine schedule for the business license regulation bylaw be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. We have no notices of motion. Councillor Armstrong?
Your Worship, just one moment, please. Sorry. It was just brought to my attention that when you requested anyone wishing to speak, Councillor Brown didn't read out the actual business license bylaw to be adopted and went on straight to the fees and charges amendment bylaw.
I thought he
Or no, the business license bylaw was read twice? Oh, yeah, sorry, the fees and charges amendment bylaw was read twice. So we just need a motion to adopt the business license bylaw 7318.
I think that's correct, because I paused on the second time because I thought I had already read the same thing.
All right, well,
Yeah, sorry about that.
by
So
all means, read it out.
we've had two adoptions of one of the bylaws and we missed an adoption of the business license one.
I will move that business license bylaw 2021, number 7318, to regulate the operation of businesses within the city of Nanaimo be adopted.
I must say that it's not in the agenda. That's probably why there's a bit of confusion here. If it's 7218, there's 7318, but there's no 7218.
No, Your Worship, it is 7318 that wasn't read. So Councillor Brown read fees and charges amendment bylaw 7041.03 two times and didn't read the first one. He knows what he's talking about.
That's correct, Your Worship. I observed that myself. It was skipped over and read the second one twice.
Good thing you're getting rid of me soon, of this.
So he's moved the correct one now, and I believe Councillor Bonner's wishing to second it. And so, yeah, it just wasn't.
Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We're good to go. Thank you. Other business, Councillor Armstrong, motion re safety audits and 911 response calls via mental health specialists. It should come on.
Oh, there it is. Thank you. Motion that council support the RCMP Community Policing Team in securing a meeting with the Honourable Sheila Malcolmson, MLA, to present the safety audit reports and request a solution.
And a second, Councillor Martman.
If I could just speak to it, that could be even just via a letter, Your Worship, through you, requesting that there be a meeting. I know that she does meet regularly with Superintendent Fletcher, but this is actually to meet also with the community policing team.
Thank you. Motion does give it the heft of council. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Councillor Armstrong.
And a motion that council direct staff to engage with the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, UBCM, to engage the province on resolving the issue of how 911 calls can be routed and responded to by mental health specialists, whether police or Ministry of Health throughout the province.
Seconded, Councillor Martman.
And if I could just speak to that as well. We heard from Superintendent Fletcher that over 400 calls a month are going to mental health. And I think this would be a way that we could start doing that. It may be appropriate, and perhaps Ms. Gurry can correct me or not, that this may be a resolution that we put forward to at the appropriate time, or I will seek her guidance on that, Your Worship. Just thought of that now.
Your Worship, the deadline for AVICC, which then is forwarded on to UBCM, are coming up for January, so those resolutions will be coming for council's thought and contribution in the near future for AVICC, which then go to UBCM.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Your Worship, just as follow-up, that it probably should be council that endorses it, not staff. When I look at it, because I think staff has already been engaged, and then perhaps we could just follow up with the UBCM resolution. I'm open up to what everybody else has to say.
In the circumstances then, do we want to vote on this motion in this, given what Councillor Armstrong has requested?
Your worship, as it's her motion, if she wishes to amend it to direct staff, that council prepare a motion to UBCM or a resolution to UBCM that includes her what is written in that motion, that might be what she wishes to switch it to, or?
If I could just ask Mr. Rudolph, would that be more appropriate than having staff deal with it?
Through the mayor to Councillor Armstrong. So if council's intent is to raise this issue as something that should be advocated for, staff can create the motion and bring it back for your vote. Otherwise, it would be staff contacting UBCM saying that there was an interest expressed at the council meeting, this motion was passed. So it's more likely to be the former. You would probably want to see a motion that, or modify this motion just to simply say that this matter could be referred to the GPC session, I'm assuming, that we're going to have with respect to creating a list of topics that you would like to send to AVICC and UBCM, so that it's going to be on the list, it sounds like. So one way or the other, even staff could be directed to contact UBCM for more information to help furnish that. So it's whatever way you want to handle it.
So I guess it can stay as is. If they're going to gather the information, then we'll have it for the GPC.
I have Councillors Brown and Bonner on the list. Did you wish to say something in respect of this? So you're not, if you touch, it's not coming on?
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I was going to ask what engage with the UBCM meant, but now I think we're entering for where probably the discussion should go. And I think we should have it at GPC because UBCM has done a lot of work on this already, and maybe it's fortifying that or augmenting that or pushing that further. But I would really feel comfortable having that conversation around what exactly we're getting at and where we're trying to go with it. And then maybe that turns into a resolution, which I think would be the appropriate thing. Right now, I think the way I read it would just be we'd get some information back, and I think probably the intention here is to do more than just that. So I would fully support it going to a GPC to have a conversation of what we're trying to get at and get some more input.
And Councillor Bonner.
Worship, pretty well the same thing to me. I just didn't know how staff was going to engage UBCM to engage the province. So I'd be looking forward to a conversation at GPC on this, absolutely.
Ms.
That information can be utilized at a future GPC?
Yeah, so if it could just say that council directs staff to bring back, bring to a GPC the discussion around resolutions for council to engage with the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, et cetera, et cetera. So basically bring the information back to a GPC for further discussion for resolutions from
Yes,
council.
please. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your...
And is there agreement from the seconder for that? Because it's just...
I was going to say Councillor Bonner seconds. Sure. I think we're as clear as we can possibly be on sort of where we want to go if staff will only take us there with the appropriate language.
Seconding those ones.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. The next is Councillor Hemmons' motion memorandum of understanding with BC Housing. My understanding, speaking to Councillor Bonner earlier, that he would like to debate or add or vote on the four following portions individually. And I was thinking about this, Ms. Gurry.
Your worship, the whole motion could be moved and seconded at once, and then the individual bullets voted on seriatim and discussed that way.
I wonder if, may I? I wonder if I could, thank you, I'm on the queue, it says.
Nothing's,
I'm on.
nothing here.
I wonder if I might be allowed to make my argument before the motion is disassembled and voted on seriatim.
The appropriate thing would be to make the motion, second it, and then speak to it. And then make your position known as to why you would oppose having it dealt with seriatim.
Okay, so would you like me to read it out? Or is it okay to move the motion as written?
I think
You can move, just move it as written.
Okay, so I will move the motion as written.
And it's seconded by Councillor Bonner. And Councillor Bonner, and there's no reason.
I think Councillor Hemmons could now speak to the motion.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. So My intent here is I want to express sincere gratitude for the investment and the partnerships that we've developed with BC Housing over the term, over our term. This motion, in my mind, responds to a few potential loose ends in terms of our advocacy strategy, as well as provides staff with very clear direction on some finer points, which I will go through. So in terms of the first bullet, addressing housing needs identified in the Health and Housing Action Plan, that is the current letter that we have submitted to BC Housing, and that is in motion. Explores opportunities to cap permanent supportive housing units at 35 residents. This is a policy piece that actually emerges from our 2008 plan to end homelessness, and it was a number identified by the public at that time. I've done some research, and I'm not entirely convinced that 35 is the right number or why that number has been chosen. But given that it exists in a policy document, I would like to empower staff to bring that to BC Housing to say what does this look like? I imagine we can play that out, and that would look like fewer buildings, smaller investments, but we don't know that, and I'd like to provide staff with the opportunity to have that conversation as they negotiate. The third bullet point, the creation of dry facilities. We currently have 6 dry beds funded in Nanaimo, and there is a new 49-unit building recently built in Kelowna by BC Housing that is a dry facility, and I think this is something that we've heard a lot at this table, and I want to empower staff to be able to enter into that conversation and what that looks like. And then the development of transitional housing, this, like the first bullet, we discussed this in our Health and Housing Action Plan, but really this is just an emphasis to say that we have had a wonderful investment around permanent supportive housing builds, but the Health and Housing Action Plan, as well as all of the policy documentation to date, talks about the spectrum of housing and that you can't flood one particular housing form. We need to create space in all of the housing forms. So, thank you.
Thank you. And just to be clear, you're going to speak to the motion, but we will do the voting seriatim all at once. Or do you want to speak to each one individually?
I'm not sure that I'm...
No, Your Worship. So the motion has been moved and seconded altogether. Councillor Hemmons spoke to the entire motion. Council can debate and speak to the entire motion as it is, and when it comes to the vote can just be taken on 1, 2, and 3. It's not a debate and discussion on each one. It's all on the floor right now. It's just the vote on bullets 1, 2, and 3.
That's what I was suggesting. You will speak to the motion, and then we will vote separately on them at the end after we have debated, if that's all right.
Councillor Hemmons has a question, Your Worship.
I'm just not sure that that's the intent of my motion. My motion is to deliver a single motion here. I don't, if Councillor Bonner wishes to vote against and then bring them forward separately, I would, if that's the conversation he wants to have, but that's not my intent. I don't mean for this to be parceled out into 4 separate votes. This is a single motion.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah.
I only read one motion. And so I'm just thinking here if, like, in my mind, if there's going to be changes, it would have to be via amendment. But that's, I would go to Ms. Gurry, but I just read one motion.
Well, I had certainly considered the possibility of amendments, but it strikes me that that would make it even more complex than simply discussing all of this, whether or not you support all 4 or 3 or whatever, and then voting on them seriatim. And some would pass and would form part of the overall motion, and some wouldn't, or maybe they'll all pass. We don't know that. So, Ms. Gurry, whatever gets us out of this Gordian knot.
Your Worship, I tend to actually understand what Councillor Hammond's point is. And in the past, when procedurally voting on items seriatim has come up, it has been by a consensus of council and agreement, especially if in this case it is her motion. So if she chooses it to be voted on as a whole and isn't in agreement of it being voted on separately, I think a formal amendment to the motion, should Councillor Bonner wish that, would be appropriate.
So I take Ms. Gurry's advice always, and I'm going to take it what she has just told us is, Councillor Bonner, if you have concerns about any portion of this motion, you should move an amendment, have it seconded, it'll pass or fail, and then we'll get back to the main motion, depending on how many times people wish to amend or not amend. Sorry, can't anyone press their speaker and get it up tonight? I've got a... Councillor Bonner, sorry, go ahead.
I'm still position 4, but I am on. Excellent. I appreciate the motion, and I know that we do need another MOU with BC Housing. My concerns were for point 2 and 3, and the 35 residents. I know there's probably, and here's my concern is, we've been told this many times, BC Housing is, they're responsible for building housing right across the province. And they will build housing.
We're speaking to the motion.
Mm-hmm. No, we're just debating the motion.
Okay, then I'm just curious where we're at in our speakers. Sorry.
Sorry, in fairness, if I was going through the speakers list,
No.
but I've tried to take into account where the concern is coming from so that we get to the meat of whatever disagreement might exist around this council table. I apologize if I have left some people off, but...
Mm-hmm. I am more than willing to wait, or I can continue, like...
My fault, go ahead.
All right, so my concern is, and we've heard this from BC Housing before, is that they build housing right across the province, and they build it where it's easiest to get done. They don't have any requirements to build X amount of spaces here or X amount of spaces there. So when we start putting conditions on a memorandum of understanding to build housing here, I think that creates a situation where we're making it a little bit more difficult. I'm fine with having residents at 35, individual places at 35 residents. I just don't know if BC Housing looks at that as the optimum number, because they have budgets, they have to pay people to manage these buildings, so there's probably a number that they have in their mind where it works out best dollar for a person housed. And so that's a number which I'm not sure if it's 35 or it's 45. The creation of dry facilities, again, I'm not opposed to the concept, I just don't know, and I hear that one was built in Kelowna, as Councillor Hammonds has said, but I don't know if that's where it's going to happen here, because we've been told in the Housing First model that they house people where they're at. And I realize there's a number of people on the street who need facilities and who are not addicted to drugs or not alcoholics. But this whole idea of a creation, both of these 2 points are generally, I see, put forward by individuals who don't want housing in their neighborhoods, or they want to keep them, or they want to keep them low, or they want dry facilities. And I just think it's going to put a bit of a wall up, or make it harder for BC Housing to get the housing, or for us to advocate for housing in this area. Again, I seconded the motion. I don't necessarily have a problem with them. I just think that they're going to cause a bit of problem. So if we are going to look for the creation of dry facilities, is the city of Nanaimo prepared to help pay for those? Like, if we're going to be putting up conditions, are we prepared to start paying for them? If we're going to say that residents should be capped at 35, and BC Housing says our optimum is 42, are we going to be paying for the extra 7 residents to make it worth their while? So, I mean, these are just things that they're a bit unknowns, So I just don't know if we should be going down that route, this way. We literally need 600 units, right, tomorrow. And to put anything in front of that, I think is not a good idea. So that was my only conditions regarding the motion itself.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and I think my comments, to some extent, echo those of Councillor Bonner. I'm in, I think, full agreement with the points within this motion, and I will support it. I personally believe in smaller units. I don't know if 35 is quite the optimum number. I certainly believe in dry facilities and development of transitional housing. But my concern is that I've sat at this table for 7 years while staff have worked and worked and worked to establish a relationship with BC Housing. And the reality is, I think we have to be very careful with our wording, that we are not seen to be being directive. We are requesting that these things be considered in an MOU. But I just have a fear of souring our relationship with BC Housing, as happened back in 2017, as some will remember in Chase River. BC Housing comes with the money, and they say, we're prepared to do this in this location. And if we say, no, we want these conditions, the response could well be, well, thanks very much, we'll take our money and we'll go build housing somewhere else. And it's taken us a long time to reestablish a good relationship with BC Housing since 2017. So I'm very leery of doing anything which will sort of drive a wedge in the working relationship that our staff has developed. And I don't know if it would be fair to ask staff to comment on the wording of this motion, but if Mr. Lindsay is brave enough to be put on the spot, I hope I'm expressing myself well. I do support the motion, but I just think we have to be very careful that we're not seen to be trying to tell BC Housing, here's what we demand, and if you don't like it, we're not signing an MOU.
Not just yet. Who's going to hold it? Mr. Lindsay, angels go in or something like that?
Your Worship, maybe the best I can do is kind of offer how staff would interpret if this was passed. And I think the key is the term negotiate a memorandum of understanding. And I would almost treat this like a mandate to go and negotiate. As with all mandates, you might not get all, you might get part, it might be modified, but it would set at least council's priorities, that we would start that or continue that discussion with BC Housing as these are the priorities, but and we would see where it would go from there. But I think there's lots of good points that BC Housing might respond to on specifics, but we would bring those back to council ultimately at the end of those negotiations.
So, Your Worship, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Lindsay. And that reassures me that this is simply setting out council's sort of mandate or priorities to bargain with, and we'll see where it goes. So on that basis, I'm certainly happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor, in order, just so everyone knows, Councillors Brown, Martman, Bonner, Armstrong, Gesselbrock, Turley, Hemmons. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a tough one. I'm supportive of the intention, but so on the Health and Housing Action Plan, we wrote a letter. We're seeking some sort of agreement on how that's hopefully going to get implemented. So I would just view this as a reiteration of that. When it comes to explore opportunities to cap permanent supportive units at 35 residents, I appreciate that's in an existing policy document, but then I also appreciate the comment that don't know where it came from. I would like to understand that better. Is 35 the optimum? I know there's a lot of things out there that say it is. But then I'm of the opinion of, is an MOU with BC Housing the best way to realize that? that I would be much more interested in exploring opportunities around, can that be limited via the zoning? So it's not subject to an MOU. Because BC Housing can come and seek property and with existing zoning and build. So I think there's some big question marks there for me, and I'd be more curious in other tools that could see that universally, that doesn't require the negotiation with BC Housing on an MOU. And it also begs further land use questions of, if BC Housing purchased a property next to Upland Walk right now, could they build 35 residents right side by side? So are we talking about community impacts of residents that require supportive housing on the neighborhood or the surrounding area? Because if they're all in one building at 50, or they're at 70 across two buildings right beside each other, it's the same difference. So again, I think that needs to be explored, of what number that we support as council based on research and policy documents, and how do we best realize that for the city, that is, ideally as hammered down as possible. And I'm not sure this would achieve that. On the last two, creation of dry facilities and development of transitional housing, generally supportive again, but there's big question marks there for me around, what is BC Housing currently doing? What does the housing, the Health and Housing Action Plan, I would hope would inform that. But I know that BC Housing does tons of projects that never come to this council table. So if this is to be the articulated position of council for staff to have a mandate around negotiation through an MOU, I think I have too many question marks in my head about what the particulars mean to support it at this time, while I can fully support the intention here. So I would have much preferred if this came to a GPC to have that conversation and understand it more, and then provide clear intention to staff. Because at this point, I have so many question marks that I wouldn't be sure what I'm giving staff to have a mandate on. Thanks.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I want to say I concur with Councillor Hemmons that I like the motion, all in one motion, and to incorporate all these ideas. When I look at the motion, I focus on the words, and the first word that comes to mind is negotiate. So to me, negotiation just means further conversations. It doesn't mean anything is written in stone, but it means we need to have conversations of what we see as priorities in our city. So exploring the opportunities to cap the residents. It doesn't say do it. It says, what does this look like if we were to explore those opportunities? I think many of us have heard from neighborhood associations. It's not necessarily NIMBY, it's that many of the neighborhood associations are concerned with the size of perhaps the supportive units, and that they're looking for, yes, it's fine in our backyard, but we don't know if we can handle more than 35. The creation of dry facilities and the development of transitional housing, to me, is the next step that is definitely needed. We have our supportive housing, but where people move out of that supportive housing and where they move to is another question. I look at that as part of our rental stock, as to rent-to-income housing that is lacking in our cities across Canada. And when we talk about 600 units are needed immediately, I think we need 600 units of complex care immediately. And then we need rent-to-income housing for everybody else who doesn't fall in that category. So I like all of these plans. I think these conversations need to happen. I think we're a different flavor than we were in 2017, and the professionalism of our staff and BC Housing, who's seen how open our council is to improving our housing in our city, will be absolutely open to listening. How do we move forward doing what's best? So I definitely support it. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm glad we're finally having the discussion and open, as I've been pushing for this for over 4 years. I think there's something that we have to remember, and that's we also represent all the citizens in Nanaimo, not just the homeless. And we're hearing from a lot of them about the issues that have surrounded them by these units. And we don't have the same issues with those that have 35 in them. That's one point I'll make. When you look at Wesley Street, ever since Tent City went, we're not getting the same amount of complaints from the neighborhood. We don't get the same number of complaints from Uplands Walk because they're at 35. And when you say, Councillor Thorpe, that we can't direct BC Housing, we did direct BC Housing in that one because I was part of the RSP contingent on that one. And the direction there was over 45 years of age and alcoholics. That was the criteria to go into Uplands Walk at the time, and that was agreed upon by the community, so that's why that went that route. When it comes to the policy of numbers, there was research done on that, is my recollection, and that was also the numbers that some of the BC Housing people came up with at the time. And one of the reasons for the smaller numbers, you can get the staff to appropriately care for the individuals. Because right now, when you have one nurse going in to look after 70 people, she does not have the ability to do that. So I think we need to look at that too. When we talk about putting high numbers, and these are high needs people, they don't do well altogether, and research shows that. We have homes in this community that have 9 and 10 high needs people in that we don't even know they exist because there's the appropriate staff there to look after them. I think something that we should be further looking at when we talk about supports, the support should be specified as to what type we're giving. A care aide doesn't have the skill set to look after somebody that's got severe mental health issues or severe addiction issues. So I think we need to be looking at the screening process as to who's going where, and do they have the adequate trained support staff to deal with them. So I think that's something that really needs to look at. When we talk about that people don't want it, I disagree with that. I think people don't want the crime that comes with it. So I think one way to doing that is by putting those numbers in. I also recall when United Way came and did their point in time count and talked about this, they heard loud and clear from a lot of the people on the streets they want to go into dry housing. And we don't have dry housing in this community. And you talk to addicts on the street that are trying to get clean, they cannot get clean when they're surrounded by people that are using all the time. So they want to be in a place where there's people there to support them. I mean, AA meetings can be held, or Narcotics Anonymous can be held in those places to give them the support. So I really think that this goes, I would go further, but I understand it's a negotiation point. The transitional housing is another, I think, really key part, because I do know people that are in our high needs supportive units that don't need the supports, but they're there because there's no place for them to go. Why would they leave there? So I think we need to look at that. That's why I believe in I call it the phased approach with phase 1, 2, and 3. And I think that's really important, that these people that are doing well with the supports get to move on to the next level where they don't need total wraparound supports, which then opens up the doors for those that need them to take those beds. So I think that's a really good thing. And I 100% will support this motion because I think it's a step in the right direction. And I want to thank Councillor Hemmens for bringing it forward.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. With the motion, I think the primary need is to lock down that MOU with BC Housing. I think we definitely need to get moving forward on that, and I appreciate the motion being brought forward to do so. With the question around the numbers, I think it's important, you know, as Councillor Bonner raised, that we're in the middle of a crisis, homelessness crisis, and you know, we need upwards of 600 more units to start making a dent in this, and so there's definitely a sense of urgency in that, and at the same time, I think that we need to recognize that everybody's on their back heels, and we're building this new set of institutions, building it as we're flying. And I don't think that there is any solid research on numbers of what's the best size per unit, what's the best number of ratio of staff to folks living in these places. And it's an experiment right now. And I think intuitively, folks have fallen on the size of 35, and I've had experiences working in therapeutic communities where, yeah, 35 seems like a reasonable number in terms of the staff ratios. When it gets higher than that, it gets a little bit less manageable, but that's in a different context as well. So depending on exactly who's in there, and if it's a dry facility or a housing first facility, it's wide open. I think that it is important. We have facilities that are being built that are 50 plus. We don't I think that is important that we do keep these points in there to speak with BC Housing. And if there's possibilities that we can get units and it's not going to slow down the investment in this community that are at 35, and if we can get a dry facility, I think we need such a huge spectrum that whatever we can do and the diversity, we can then see what works. But I definitely think that there's room for a dry facility 100%, and see how that would go. So I support having the language in it as it is. I think what's important, though, is that we need to urge the province to provide more funding to BC Housing and to provide more funding to build these places, because I think, too, with uptake in the community, you know, if it's smaller units, every neighborhood has the responsibility of supporting this. And if we can make sure there's a model that's safe, that can provide housing and that can fit well into communities, then the easier it is to get that investment and build. So I think the way that Mr. Lindsay explained how staff would be approaching it, I think is a very measured, fair way that would avoid falling into the traps and concerns that Councillor Bonner raised about putting unnecessary obstacles in front of investment that we sorely need no matter what. So I trust that the motion as is, as staff would implement it, would be effective. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Most of the others have indicated the key word is negotiate, and I agree with that. And I would just go further by saying that the 4 bullet points, in my mind, are requests, not demands. And I think that's a key point in a negotiation process. And just on another topic, I'd just like to remind Councillor Armstrong that not all nurses are she's.
Oh, thank
Councillor Hemmons, you've asked us to begin. I'm going to suggest we go to Councillor Bonner and let you.
Okay.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to touch base on a couple of things. Like I said, I'm not necessarily opposed to this motion. And to Councillor Armstrong's point, I think we all do recognize we represent the entire population of the city. Getting 600 people off the street and into a place where they can get the medical and health needs they want is going to help everybody in this city, not just the 600. So to Councillor Martman's comments, if we look at 35 units as opposed to 45 units, if we wanted to house 180 people, we're looking at either building 5 places or 4 places. And this is something that BC Housing, I think, takes, looks at it. It's a lot cheaper to build 4 than it is to build 5. So these are just things, and my only concern here is that if we start putting up the roadblocks, people will stop negotiating with us and they'll just move on, right? So that was my only concern as when bringing this thing up at the beginning. So thanks very much for the debate. I look forward to more.
If I may, Councillor Hemmons, I'm going to speak and I'll give you the last word. All right. I haven't been entirely satisfied with the wording of this motion in that I think everybody has some idea where they want it to go and what they want it to do, but I don't know that it does it in a perfect way. But Mr. Lindsay has assured us that staff gets it. I just throw this out, not as a motion at this point, that it could more easily read perhaps that council directs staff to negotiate a memorandum of understanding with BC Housing, which considers, among other matters, housing needs identified in the Health and Housing Action Plan, opportunities to cap permanent supportive units at 35 residents, creation of dry facilities and development of transitional housing. It just strikes me that that might be a little more accurate in terms of what we're trying to do, because we're all relying on the word negotiate right now on the basis that we expect that Mr. Lindsay will come back here with a smile on his face and a happy step, or he'll come dragging himself back here saying, I tried and they told us to pound sand, and if we're not going to get any units here till hell freezes over. So I throw it out. If I saw enthusiasm around the table, I'd say, I will make the motion, but otherwise, I will support the motion because I am generally satisfied. It gets to the points, but I agree with the cautionary notes of Councillor Bonner. I would hate to see us in a position where BC Housing gets the excuse on the basis of this motion or our negotiating tactics to walk away, because I can tell you in my conversations, as I've said at this table many times with the other urban mayors in the BC Urban Mayors Caucus and the mayors, I'm sure, of every other community of any size in this province, including Campbell River, who wanted to get a number of mayors of smaller communities together, including me, to talk about this. There are dozens of cities, communities in this province who will happily take anything that BC Housing will provide, that will see some of the population who live in their streets off those streets, supportive, dry, wet, whatever you want to say. So I do think we have to keep that in mind, but I will support the motion as it is, as I say, unless somebody wanted to move that. But Councillor Hemmens, you get the last word tonight.
Appreciate all the comments. This is exactly what I was hoping for. A couple of things. I think there's a miscommunication, and I think Mr. Lindsay cleared it up for the most part, but I do want to assure Council that this motion was crafted in consultation with staff. I understood that we were interpreting it in the same way. So I apologize for lack of clarity in that wording, but my intention is just as Mr. Lindsay expressed. I'm hearing articulated position of Council. That is absolutely not the intention here. Nor do I agree that these would be conditions of our next MOU. This is simply empowering staff to go in and have a conversation to say, this community, BC Housing, we're having these sorts of conversations with our residents. I don't necessarily know that I believe in capping residents at 35, because just like Councillor Gesselbrock said, we need this investment desperately. However, if we're worried that BC Housing will take a walk simply because we are saying, hey, these are the conversations we want to have, then I don't think that represents the partnership that I know that we actually have, because through the Health and Housing Task Force, Councillor Bonner and I did have a lot of contact with BC Housing, and I believe that they would actually welcome news like this. And I think, as Councillor Armstrong said, they want to negotiate with communities that are really clear and really understand what, they understand the land, they have things ready in motion, they're going to go where it's easiest to go, and I think that this actually makes it easier for them. I actually think this partners really well with Councillor Brown's earlier motion around finding sites. Imagine if we went to BC Housing and we said, okay, we have 2 sites, here's our, here are our parameters. I actually think that's really easy for BC Housing to then negotiate with staff and have that conversation. I don't intend for this to be locking us in any way, but simply to represent the conversations to BC Housing that we've been having as a community.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmens. Councillor Brown, you wanted to?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I think everything's been well said, but I do think wording matters, and it says which incorporates. I much prefer the language considers, because that is a negotiation. Incorporates is kind of a list of criteria. But then I'm hearing that's not, but it's a negotiation, so we can be flexible. I just think, we have a health and housing action plan, which I get is key number 1, but I have trouble supporting this when I'm not clear if some of those existing conditions may be contradictory to some of the items that we're hoping to realize in there. And I think that's challenging. I would have, and I'm even less clear. But yeah, I think it puts in a tricky spot to vote tonight, because fundamentally I'm in support of the intention here. I just don't think the puzzle pieces don't fit to me around an effective advocacy strategy to really achieve what we're trying to achieve with the conversation that needs to happen to get to that point. So maybe I'm missing something, and I wasn't part of the cajillion conversations that led to the creation of the Health and Housing Action Plan, and this could very much be in line with that, but the dots aren't connecting for me. So I'm not sure how I'm going to vote because I'm highly supportive of the intention, but I just don't want to keep feeling like we're throwing stuff at the wall and hope something sticks when I was really optimistic when we got the Health and Housing Action Plan. The letter went out that that's the position we are now moving away from and being a little more targeted and strategic. So this very well may be in line with that. It's just not clear to me that it is. Thanks.
All those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Brown, motion carries. Well, I think Mr. Lindsay's had Councillor Armstrong.
I'm just wondering if we can take new business now based on the delegation.
Yes. If you want to say something.
Yes, I do. I think that Mr. Snyder raised a very valid point about what's going on. We've seen it in Surrey, we've seen it in Langley, where they've been losing their homes and they haven't been compensated. And I guess question is through to probably Mr. Lindsay. If this is something that staff is looking at, or is this something that, again, that should go to a GPC topic under land use?
Mr. Lindsay.
So, Your Worship, I think the short answer is it's something that Council's looking at. It's in your affordable housing strategy as a work plan item already, to look at tenant relocation programs as part of the redevelopment of rental properties, including mobile home parks. It's one of the longer term items. We've just worked through short-term rentals. Staff are working on adaptive housing policy, family-friendly policy right now, but it is one of the items on the work plan, and we would normally be updating that on the review of the status review, which I think is scheduled for January, if memory serves. So yes, it is in the work plan to be developed. I think a couple of points that the longer answer is, a couple of points is that, in case it didn't come across tonight, it is currently mandated, or regulated, by the province through the Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act, I think it's called. I might have the title slightly wrong, but as the speaker mentioned, it has been amended a few times in the past few years. So there is an existing provincial regulation that sets the framework for compensation if parks are going to be revised. So we can talk more about that when we bring it back through the work plan. The one thing I would note, and the speaker kind of made the point maybe unintentionally this evening, is that although we've seen mobile home parks developed around the province and the loss of mobile home parks, but we haven't seen it in the Nanaimo. I don't know the details of these other communities, but I could say one of the things that I do know about Nanaimo is that we have very specific zoning for the vast majority of our mobile home parks. It's the only permitted use. So if there is to be a change of use on the park, it requires coming forward with an application, it requires approval of council, and it provides an opportunity for us to ask questions such as tenant relocation plans. So I'm not sure if that puts us at a footing above other municipalities, but I think it does help explain why we haven't seen that that stampede for the transition of our existing mobile home park.
So as a follow-up, he mentioned that update bylaw 2704. Is that something that's being looked at as well? Where he said only 7 of the 24 homes are being covered?
I'm not sure about, sorry, I don't understand the 7 of 24.
He said only 7 of the existing manufactured home parks, trailer parks, whatever, are covered by bylaw 2704. That means that the other ones aren't covered by our bylaw.
I'd have to follow up and better understand. The mobile home park bylaw applies to all mobile home parks in the city, unless there was ones that were created. Possibly what he's saying is there were a number that were created before the creation of the bylaw. Generally, your mobile home parks bylaw is a standards bylaw. It talks about how wide driveway widths are, for example, how big lots are in a mobile home park. It's not the place that we've really seen things like this. It's more other communities have adopted them as policies. So when these parks start to be redeveloped, the council will have a policy about what are the expectations around tenant relocation plans. And that's the work that we're scheduled to do.
Now you put my mind at ease that it's being looked at. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'm going to assume there's nothing in the question period sheet.
No, Your Worship.
Then I'm looking for the usual motion. Moved Councillor Bonner for adjournment, seconded Councillor Turley. All those in favor, thank you very much, everyone. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Just like LA law.